There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. I think this is the latest on a Friday that I have filmed my video. It's 10 after 6 at night. I have had the pokiest day. I spent a couple hours finishing up the edits to the mystery guest portion of this Friday Reads, but mostly I was just kind of pokey. And I'm not going to wallow in my feelings, at least not very much, about the election results, but it has been an incredible strain on my morale to hear about the absolutely batshit crazy people that Trump is appointing to his cabinet, and I guess none of us should be surprised. The most positive spin I can put on it is with the likes of RFK Jr., Matt Gaetz, and Tulsi Gabbard in his cabinet. Perhaps the alleviation of the dark fascist stuff will be the slapstick incompetence of all those folks. But that is about as positive as I can be. The one really good thing I did for myself was that maybe Tuesday morning, or I don't know, one morning this week, before I even got out of bed, I unsubscribed from 95% of the political podcasts, the American political podcasts that I have immersed myself in. Some of them going back to 2007, but certainly during this latest election season, I have just inundated myself, and I cannot continue that masochist behavior. So I even subscribed. Well, I unsubscribed from Morning Joe. They pissed me off the way they immediately switched to blaming the Democrats for their woke shit. And I often get pissed off with Joe, but at other times I really love him, but I'm not going to watch him, at least not for a while. And even Rachel Maddow, I've unsubscribed from all of the MSNBC podcasts. I just don't want to expose myself to that, at least for the next while. And I canceled my subscription to the Washington Post, and Mom and I are going to cancel our subscription to the New York Post. The amount of times I actually click on an article and read it, rather than just skimming the headlines, it's like it's not so. And I don't want to know too much about what's going to happen over the next while. Burying my head in the sand is not the answer over the long term, but in the short term, I think it's what I need. So I'm pleased that I took that step. Now, then, when I heard about Matt Gaetz and RFK, I kind of had a relapse. I didn't resubscribe to anything, but I did watch quite a bit of coverage. It is fascinating in the most depressing way. So, I'll kind of go back and forth with it. So one of the books that I've started and finished this week was as a replacement for all of that news consumption. So stay tuned for that. Last night I attended one of those Zoom discussion, literary events that became so popular during the pandemic, and I've gotten really away from it. 90% of the ones I sign up to watch, I never do. This one I did actually show up for, and that was the queer Lebanese-American novelist Rabih Alameddine, and he has a new book of essays. I think it might be one or two essays, because the book is only 96 pages. It's just been published in the last day or two, I think. Comforting Myths Concerning the Political and Art, published by the University of Virginia Press. And this was a Zoom chat between him and John Freeman, who I'd never heard of, but apparently I should have. He writes for the New Yorker, and he's got annual anthologies or something that come out, and doing this, that, and the other thing. And he is just gorgeous. I couldn't stop staring at his sensuous lips, but I did manage to take in most of what was being discussed. I had never watched Rabih Alameddine talk about anything, and boy, he's a erudite and very entertaining, wise man. And so, yeah, he's written these essays about the political in art and comforting myths, and I found it brilliant. I can't really begin to tell you the first thing about what he said, because it is just the kind of thing that I don't retain in order to kind of spout it back to you. If that video goes live in the next few days, I will update my show notes with it. In the meantime, I did find an essay called Comforting Myths that was posted on Zoom that Rabih Alameddine wrote a couple of years ago, and I assume that's one of the essays in the book, so you can listen to that. But he talked about things like querying why John Updike is not regarded as a political writer when he was writing about mundane suburbanites during the height of the Vietnam War. That is political literature if you're choosing to ignore the serious geopolitical event that your country is perpetrating on the world and instead choosing to write about white picket fences. That's political. He had many much more sublime and nuanced things to say, and very self-critical about himself as an American and how much he is complicit in all of this. It was fascinating. He also talked about, and a lot of this is in that video essay that I'm going to link in the show notes, about the North. What's the book? I hated it. I read it last year. I didn't bail, but I really did not enjoy it. Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. Sudanese. It was a Sudanese novella. Dennis Johnson-Davies is the translator, and I really had a negative reaction to it. It made me uncomfortable. It was too dark. It didn't satisfy me on any level, but boy, did Alameddine open my eyes to a lot of things that I missed, so I must reread that. Of course it's uncomfortable for a colonial like me to read it, and I need to reread it with that in mind. His comments on that novella were fascinating. All right, that's my little preamble. I have no other personal news, so let's go directly to another extremely exciting mystery guest. This week's mystery guest is the graphic artist, writer, wears a lot of hats, and we're going to explore that haberdashery in this chat. Maurice Vellekoop, and his most recent book is I'm So Glad We Had This Time Together, a graphic memoir that was gifted to me by my dear friend Lindy, who, when she read it, realized it screamed my name. So I am here talking to Maurice. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Your latest big news in a year, I think, of fabulous news in your world is that you have won the Toronto Book Awards, the first graphic book to win that. Tell us all about that lovely event.
Yeah, so it was last Thursday, and the event took place at the Toronto Reference Library. Ali Hassan from the CBC was the host for the evening, and he was delightful. So there was 5 finalists. I had sort of been thinking that I would likely not win the prize. And so when they announced my name, I was very surprised. And the speech, I think, benefited from that because I felt like the audience got the emotion that I was delivering. So it was a lovely evening.
Well, congratulations. So tell us
Thanks.
about I'm So Glad We Had This Time Together.
Yeah, so it's, as you say, a graphic memoir. It's the story of my life from the age of 4 till my late 30s. I'm 60 now. A lot of it's about growing up in a very sort of unusual community of Dutch immigrant Christians. My parents were part of something called the Christian Reformed Church, a very severe Calvinist faith that puts a lot of emphasis on education and very intolerant of homosexuality. So when I came out to my parents, my mother had known I was gay since I was little. I mean, everybody knew, but but when I told her, though, she couldn't accept it. She told me when I came out that she hoped that I would never act on my desire, because that's what the church recommends for gay people, is that they either be celibate and Christian, or they face eternal damnation. So that's what I grew up with. And then when I came out in the early 80s, that was just at the start of the AIDS era. And so I became very, I had a couple of experiences with men that were not great. And then I just kind of shut down for many, many years. And so, yeah, that's basically the content of the book.
Well, at the risk of being impertinent or something, I'd like to say you've come a long way, baby.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what a 60th year you've had, or I guess 61st year. That's wonderful. We're almost the same age, so I relate to a lot of what you've said. I grew up in a Christian home that was more left-leaning Protestant, the United Church of Canada. So I didn't have the hell and damnation stuff other than just being exposed to it in culture. But certainly everything else you've talked about, I relate to too much. Although I grew up in a farm near a small town in Saskatchewan, so that made it even perhaps more homophobic in that sense. I expect the memoir is going to speak to me very deeply, and especially the title. I love the title so much, and I know exactly where you got it. But for people that are too young to know, where does the title come from, Maurice?
So the title comes from the Carol Burnett show, which was a very popular variety show on television in the 60s through to the 70s. And the title comes from a song that Carol would sing at the end of every episode of the show. And so in the book, the Carol Burnett show was very, very important to me, like the most important thing to me as a child. And my parents were very strict about everything, including bedtimes. And so there was a point in my childhood when I was being sent to bed halfway through the Carol Burnett show at 8:30. And so this great injustice really affected me badly, and there was screaming and tears and pleading, and no, it had to be 8:30. And so that sort of represents the first real conflict I had with my mother. So it's kind of a loaded thing in the book. And it's also, as a title, it works on many levels because it can be read in a very straightforward way, and it can be read in a snarky kind of way. And it can be also read in a very sad way, I think, too.
I don't remember being sent to bed halfway through Carol Burnett, but I just grew up loving Carol Burnett, and I still adore her. And
Sure.
she's still going strong in a new
She
sitcom.
is
She's my hero.
so
And
amazing.
yeah, and all that stuff is still on YouTube. I love watching it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if she's aware of this book?
I know that the publicists at Pantheon have tried their best, and Chip Kidd is my editor in New York, and he seems to know everyone except Carol Burnett. So I know that he's been trying too, but it's difficult. Apparently, it's difficult to get through to her. She's probably got layers of interface between herself and whoever's trying to contact her.
You've got a wonderful blurb from Anderson Cooper, who may be able to pull a few strings in that regard. He says that your memoir is that rarest of things, a book about coming out to a loving yet conservative family that is as heartrending to read as it is to look at. It's an incredibly moving, funny, and ultimately triumphant account, spoiler alert, of what can only be described as a magical fairy tale, pun totally intended. I am a little skeptical about blurbs, but that one I think was heartfelt and sincere.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. I just heard, like literally, you were in the Zoom waiting room while I happened, because I was trying to find something on YouTube about how to pronounce your name, and I didn't ever find your name spoken on YouTube, but I did hear you at the beginning of a chat with Kobo, where you said, I
Oh,
think
yes.
somewhat tongue in cheek, but it was a wonderful quote, and let's see if I can quote it. My advice to anybody who wants to write a memoir, and I'm not sure if write's the correct verb here, but to write a memoir is to write a book of their erotic fantasies first. Please elaborate.
Right. So I have published two books of gay erotica. And it's interesting because when you do that, they're illustrated books. There's a little bit of text in them, but they're mostly pictures. So you're sharing your fantasies with an audience of gay men and whomever is delighted or titillated by the book. And so it just seems like, yeah, having done that, shared your sexual fantasies with the world, it just seems like a small step to memoir and tearing your heart open for the world to see all the guts and the emotion and the pain and the joy.
That's wonderful. Now, I think that probably 85% of my audience will be curious as to how much graphic sex or kind of not pornographic, but I mean, erotically explicit stuff is in your memoir, because they're hoping there is lots. And then maybe 15% of my audience might want to know that because they might be turned off. So, in that spirit, can you tell us how sexy is your memoir?
Yeah, well, people will react differently towards it, obviously. And like I was saying before, there was a long period of practically celibacy in the 90s,
Right.
just because I kind of shut down. I was overwhelmed and I just kind of shut down. And so in the late 90s, I finally decide to get some help, and I start to going to psychotherapy. And my therapist is a delightful, wonderful woman and very pragmatic and practical. And she started sending me out on little tasks, like how to start flirting with people and, asking people on a date in situations where I would feel comfortable. Like I was never very good at the bar scene, for example. So
Yeah.
she was like, well, what about a book launch where there would likely be gay men there? Or a dinner party or something. And I would be like, oh yeah, that would be much more comfortable for me to talk to a guy. And so she helped me learn how to start dating. And so there are quite a number of sex scenes. You don't see penises or anything, but a lot of them are played for laughs, because as a man in their later 30s who's doing all of this stuff that he should have been doing in his 20s or teens even, there's a lot of like missteps and frustration and just men behaving strangely as they are wont to do. So there's quite a lot of sex scenes in the latter portion of the book, but they're very awkward, and there's a lot of bad sex in it too. So I think that it's interesting that I, put out these books of sex fantasies, but my real sex life was, a bit of a mess for a long time.
It's funny how that works. Um, it's dawning on me that the period of you coming out was when I lived in Toronto myself, and I was a gay
Oh,
psychotherapist in Toronto in the
oh wow.
late 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, we probably have crossed paths. If you were trying to hook up at book launches, I would have been at many of those book launches, I bet, because I went the Harborfront Festival and all the book launches I could fit into my life. I went to them. I lapped that up.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we were probably standing beside each other at least one of those.
I bet you we were. Someday I'll tell you about my experience, not my dating experience, but my experience with Timothy Findlay.
Oh,
Um, yeah. Um, yeah, this just sounds incredible. So tell me all the hats. For someone to give a thorough description of all the things you are creatively engaged in. So cartoonist,
yeah.
what else should we say? Illustrator.
Yeah. Illustrator is the main one, really.
And so you've done illustrations for some major corporations, right?
Yeah, mostly my work was for editorial. So mostly I worked in magazines. I have done some advertising work with some big clients, but the vast majority of my career was spent in the magazine world. I worked for Vogue for a number of years in the 90s, and that started off because I was also drawing comics, all the like short comics all the time
Yeah.
that I was an illustrator, and they were published in various anthologies and stuff. And in the 90s, as graphic novels started to become more accepted and more mainstream, magazines were hiring cartoonists to write and draw stories for them.
Yeah.
And so, out of the blue in 1994, I was asked by American Vogue to go to Paris for Couture Week and write a 4-page comic for Vogue based on the
Wow.
experience. So that section is depicted in the book because I wanted to show some part of my career as well, and there's just some crazy stories of meeting all these famous people in Paris. So
Oh my God. Um, and for the 85% of my viewers that might be a little bit disappointed that there's not more graphic sex in this book, can you point them towards where else they should go in your oeuvre?
right. Well, the books unfortunately are out of print, so you can find them on eBay and stuff. So one of them is called Maurice Vellekoop's ABC book, a homoerotic primer. And the other one is called Maurice Vellekoop's Pinups. Pinups was published, I think, in 2006, so that's quite a long time ago, and it was a fairly small run. And the ABC book was from 98. It went through a couple of printings, but you'd have to look online for secondhand copies.
Well, of course, now that you are a major Canadian Literary Prize winner, they must be being rushed back into print.
Well, there was an effort to get the ABC book back in print, but it was so long ago that all of the design work was on a floppy disk, and nobody knows where it is. So someone would have to redesign the whole book. So it's just, yeah, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
So, what are you working on now?
So I am back working on erotic drawings again. So I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, whether it's going to be I would love it to be a book because books are, my favorite thing, but I'm just not too certain about anyone being willing to publish it. I don't really know that world very well anymore. And the people who published my gay erotic stuff in the past are not publishing erotic work anymore. And I'm just wondering if maybe Patreon or something like that is maybe a better way to get the work out there. But I'm a complete novice with all of this, so I'm just making the work for now and seeing what'll happen.
That sounds very exciting. Keep me posted. I'd like to hear what kind of books you like to read. So I think you've got some recommendations there for us.
Sure. One of my favorite books from this year was Helen Humphreys, Followed by the Lark. Helen Humphreys is a Canadian lesbian author. I just adore her work. And this book I found incredibly moving. So it's about Henry David Thoreau, the author of Walden, a fictionalized biography of his life from childhood to death. He's got a very interesting take on a queer sensibility because Walden was attracted to men and he had some very intense friendships with men, but it's very unclear about what actually may have happened sexually. And so Humphreys just kind of pulls back from it. She notes the longing and the desire, but she makes him too confused, unable to act on his desire. And it seems to be okay with him because the friendships that he has with men and also women, and particularly his family, are so intense that they fulfill his emotional life. This idea that maybe he was just okay, with not having a sex life.
I'm a big Helen Humphreys fan, especially of her nonfiction. But yes, some of her earlier novels I've deeply loved. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then more recently, I picked up a couple of graphic novels. This is Stone Fruit by Lee Lai. This was published by Fantagraphics in the States. And I think it's from 2021. Again, a very restrained look at a gay relationship that is in the midst of collapsing throughout the book. And it's funny and it's sad and just got this real light touch that is very difficult to pull off. So bravo, Lee Lai.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I have one more if you'd like.
Please, absolutely.
So this is the newest book from Charles Burns, and he is published also by Pantheon Books, which is my publisher in New York. My book is, just by the way, it's also published by Random House Canada. And so this is the same thing. This is published by Pantheon, which is part of Penguin Random House in the States, and it's also published in Canada by Random House. So Charles Burns had been an inspiration to me since I was a teenager when his work appeared in Raw magazine and changed my life. I was not particularly interested in comics as a young person, but when I discovered Raw magazine, it blew my mind open and I realized the limitless possibilities of comics and started drawing them myself only at that point when I was like 17 or 18. His book is very much in line with previous books. So there's a kind of a off-kilter David Lynch kind of quality to them all. This is about teenagers on the West Coast, possibly in the 70s or 80s, making an amateur science fiction movie and the kind of the drama that surrounds that. I would say it's one of his most open-hearted and emotional books. I loved it.
Rapid fire question. Favorite Carol Burnett sketch?
Yeah, my favorite one. So there's a Betty Davis movie called A Stolen Life. They did a parody of that, and that is my all-time favorite sketch. So it's about twins, and Betty Davis plays twins, and one of the twins steals the other one's life. And so one of them is very outgoing and gregarious, and the other one's very shy and introverted. And the shy introverted one lives in a lighthouse. And at one point in the sketch, the light bulb goes out, and Harvey Korman plays the romantic lead, and he walks into the lighthouse with this giant light bulb, like it looks like a light bulb that you would have in your lamp. But that just still to this day is such a genius moment to me, and yeah, one of my favorite sketches.
That one doesn't ring a bell, but I think for mine, the dentist, Harvey Korman and the other guy,
Oh yeah,
dentist chair, yeah, that one, and the one where Carol Burnett, I think it might be a spoof on Gone with the Wind, where she's wearing
yeah.
a curtain. It's a dress.
Yeah, that apparently is the longest ever laugh recorded in television history, was the reaction to that dress.
That is wonderful bit of trivia. I love that so much. Favorite coming out memoir?
It would have to be Alison Bechdel's Fun Home.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, yep.
that was obviously a big inspiration for me. She really pushed the limits of what was possible in a graphic memoir because of her great erudition and literariness. Like, that's a very literary book that she wrote, and that would be my top pick for sure. And Jeanette Winterson's Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal? That is an incredible book. That's an amazing book. Oh, so great.
And one piece of advice to a gay man who will be turning 60 in just over a year include.
This is, presumably you're talking about yourself.
I'm talking about me, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to advise you. I would just say keep doing what you love, because that's the most important thing.
Well, then I think I'll be all right.
Awesome.
Maurice, this has been just a delightful chat. Thank you so much.
Okay, talk to you soon.
So, yes, thanks to Lindy, I have this in my possession, and now it's high time I get to it. Had a fairly busy week on BookTube. I think I've got, let's see, I'm babysitting Mum's dog, Charlie, for a few days, and he's got all kinds of chew toys, and I just took him out for a walk just before I sat down here, and he has pulled out an empty box and is chewing it to shreds. So if you're hearing strange noises, and he's not interested in chewing on anything he should be chewing on, he's just making a mess of things. Anyhow, I had a book call on the weekend, and then maybe Monday, and then a couple days later, a great zooming in chat with Stella, who's a wonderful Australian booktuber. Her channel is called 30 Books, and this was a chat I recorded in February about mood reading and about reading the right book at the right time. It's a wonderful conversation. Do check it out. Okay, I've had an excellent reading week despite all the time have not been able to stop myself from processing the election. One that I almost hated and one that I absolutely loved that nobody knows I read until you watch this video. So let's start with the one I almost hated, and that was Claire Fuller's penultimate novel, Unsettled Ground. I'm not going to rant about it, but I really disliked it. By the end, can I say that's good? It held my interest. At no time did I think about, no, that's not true. By the end, maybe 100 pages from the end, I thought, do I want to finish this? But 51-year-old twins in the UK in very current times. Their mother drops dead suddenly, and they are both unmarried and living with her, and all kinds of plot ensues about the cottage that the lord of the estate. I mean, it's all of that British class stuff is so confusing for me, but he's the richest guy in the area, and they're living on his land, and it's a big secret as to why. Charlie, no. It's a big secret as to why, and then they get evicted immediately after the mother drops dead, and why, and the description of the impoverished reality of these middle-aged bachelor and spinster siblings is very well described. So on that level, it was interesting, very interesting. Claire Fuller doesn't write sentences that make me gasp, but she does create a setting and describe a situation extremely well. The dialogue was also well written, I guess. I did it on audio, and the audio was so good that I didn't really need to follow along in the book anymore after the beginning chapter or whatever. I just thought that characterization was extremely thin, and the plot didn't make any sense. So I was pissed off by the end because none of what happened made sense. None of the characters had enough nuance to them that I could understand why any of the things that were secrets that eventually got revealed, or why various relationships got formed. I mean, the brother, the male twin, he was a ladies' man, and the ladies were lined up at his door. I'm exaggerating slightly, but they were lined up at his door to get a piece of him, and he lived in a house with no plumbing. He was a complete and utter loser, and it didn't make any sense that these women were trying to get into his pants. There was a whole bunch of things that didn't make sense, and I just felt it was pretty awful by the end. So I am feeling settled and shall stand my ground about the fact that this was a pretty awful novel, and I do not recommend it under any circumstances. And there's a lot of people out there, it's a bit of a Marmite book, but there's a lot of people out there that liked it a whole bunch better than I. This was a buddy read with Sonia of An Enthusiastic Reader, and she shared some of my critique, but she probably doesn't, I'm quite sure she doesn't share the intensity of my critique. So there's my contribution to the discourse. 2 stars. On a much happier note, I am delighted to tell you about this next book. This book came up in conversation in my chat with Melanie about Held by Anne Michaels that I posted the week before. This book came up briefly at the end, and then Melanie left a comment about it and said, I said some negative things about this book, and I have now gone back and tried it a second time, and I fell right into it and think it's a wonderful read. I replied to her comment and said, well, damn you, Melanie, now I'm going to have to try it, because I thought I had no interest in it, and I had completely bad-mouthed it. I had said, as is my wont, I hold fast to many of my strong opinions, but there is a significant minority of them that are absolute bullshit, and this was one of them. I said that book had no business being on the long list or the short list because it wasn't literary fiction. So now I'll tell you what the book was. It's the winner of the Booker. It's Orbital by Samantha Harvey. So the day the Booker was announced, but before the Booker was announced, I realized that I could access the audiobook and the ebook on Scribd, or it's now called something else, Everand. So I started listening to it, and I'd listened to maybe 15 or 20 minutes of it, and really loved the writing before the Booker was, the winner was announced, and it was Orbital. So I was just snuck in under the wire. I don't know why I need you to know this, but I didn't start reading it because it won the Booker. But I did start reading it because Melanie withdrew her criticisms, and then I thought, well, Sean, you were really a blowhard about this book, and I said, what the hell is a sci-fi book doing on the Booker list? And I do get on my high horse about the genre policing, the Booker and other things. So there's a bunch of you that are really happy right now, thinking that I'm turning over a new leaf, that I'm changing my spots, that I'm learning some new tricks. But I'm not going to go all the way and make all of you completely happy. What I'm going to say is, and this is always said with some tongue-in-cheek, but it's not completely tongue-in-cheek. The reason I loved it is because it's not sci-fi. It's a work of literary fiction. It's one of the most gorgeously written, satisfying, stimulating works of literary fiction I've read this year. I absolutely loved it, and I am not interested in space travel or anything like that. Never really have been until I read this book. And this book took me there through characters, and I will compare that to The Unsuccessful Held, Unsuccessful for Me by Anne Michaels, because I felt she stopped caring about her characters and just started waxing philosophical and poetic about various abstract topics and kind of left her characters hanging on the line, whereas this had a lot of those same beautiful deep thoughts, but they never became untethered from the characters. And the characters were fascinating. It was a group of, I forget how many, 7 or 8 astronauts from various countries. They're on this Earth orbit Is it a space station, whatever it is? See, I don't care about the science part of it at all. It's of no interest to me. But this book could have been located amongst a group of deep-sea oceanographers or something. It could have been set in the Antarctica, but it was about being far removed from home and the perspective it gives you on home, personally and social politically. So perspective, really, this is a novel. If it has a theme at all, and I'm not big on talking about themes in novels. I think that's for essays. It's not for talking about books. But the theme, the resounding kind of, it would keep orbiting back. Ooh, look what I did there, to the idea of perspective. There's two scenes of ekphrasis. The first one is a painting by Velázquez, if I'm pronouncing that Spanish painter's name right, and then another one of a photograph of one of the early moon missions that are central to the novel and make you think about perspective in the lives of all of these characters and everything else that happened. And I just thought it was one of the most moving and beautiful works of fiction. Oh my God, what a deserving winner. So I am just over the moon, excuse the pun, to join, however belatedly, in the celebration of this novel. I was aware of Samantha Harvey's, one of her earlier works, The Western Wind, but she's got several out there. This one set in 15th century UK, and there was a murder. So I'm going to take a wild guess that that is not a murder mystery, and it's not historical fiction, that it, too, is literary fiction. And I will insist on the distinction, however subjective it is, until my last breath. But, oh boy, was Orbital a phenomenal read. So, what an absolute delight. It could well be in my top 5. I mean, it's not a Sean book, but it was so well done that it kind of is a Sean book. Those are my thoughts on Orbital, and I hope any of you that thought you might not be interested in it will now reconsider, because I was just blown away. So that's my Friday Reads. I'm not going to start anything because I'm getting towards the year end and my goal. I'm not going to kill myself to do it, but I would like to finish everything on my current reads, and I've got a couple more buddy read type things to fit in, but basically I'm just going to be finishing up what's on my plate. Thanks for watching.